Anthony Bennett. I come from an organisation called Reboot the Future, which was, in her wisdom, founded by a woman called Kim Pullman on a very ancient precept, which is treat others and the planet as you would wish to be treated. So the important aspects of this reciprocity is that we centre nature in all that we do. Now, one of the reasons why people know of Reboot is the work that Paul Pullman did with the Sustainable Development Goals, and the SDGs are, of course, really at the heart of so much of the discussion of COP. Reboot takes that a little bit further, and we take the suggestion that the Sustainable Development Goals are a technocratic response to a crisis of values. So the science is settled now. I think that there's very little equivocation now about what really scientifically or logistically needs to be done, but the crisis is why don't we act on the SDGs and what values will cause us to do so. So Reboot says that the way that people act on their values is through culture and through education and their actions. And we engage in all three reasons. We're going to show you a film in a moment which was made by a friend and partner of ours, Jack Harries from Earthrise. And what we've taken as the subject of that film is the Antarctic. The Antarctic is an incredibly important part of the reciprocal relationship with the Earth, but it has no indigenous peoples. So it's a heavily colonized space, but it has no voice. And when you come to a big affair like COP, this incredibly existential space, which is rapidly deteriorating, has got no single unifying voice to speak for it. So the question that was presented to us was, how do you give voice to the Antarctic? And if the Antarctic had a voice here at these representations and delegations, what would she say? So that was the precept that we set to Jack when we sent him to the Antarctic. We're going to show a short film which introduces Jack, who unfortunately can't be here tonight, and then we'll go into the Antarctic film, which takes us about 10 minutes. And then we'll go into a discussion with our two speakers who I'll introduce afterwards. So if we start with Jack's film, and I'll sit down and see you in a minute.
Hi there, my name is Jack Harries. I'm a documentary filmmaker and also one of the co-founders of Earthrise Studio, which is a production company and creative agency dedicated to communicating climate and culture. Earlier this year, I was approached by Reboot the Future with a chance, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to travel to the continent of Antarctica and make a film. And the brief that was given to me was, how can we give this continent a voice ahead of the crucial COP27 conference in Egypt? Now, this is a challenge that spoke to me personally, as the year before I'd made a series called Seat at the Table, which aimed to give people living on the front lines of climate change all around the world a voice at COP26, a sort of metaphorical seat at the negotiating table. And so the idea of giving a continent a voice, one that is entirely uninhabitable to humans, felt like a really interesting challenge. It also felt personal in the sense that my journey into climate began in 2015 with the trip up to the Arctic, to Greenland, and that trip turned my world upside down. It's what set me on the path that I'm still on today. And so this was an opportunity that I didn't want to miss, and I felt like it was a really interesting challenge. Thinking about how to make the film was really tricky because, of course, this is a place that has never known war. It's uninhabitable to humans. It has no indigenous communities. And so the challenge of trying to give it a voice was difficult. And there are many ways we could have approached it. And in the end, I decided to take a very personal approach, to share my experience of what it was to go to this place and how that ultimately influenced my own understanding of my relationship to nature, my broken relationship to nature. Whilst I was there, I reflected a lot on my country's role of colonialism and extractivism and that abusive relationship that we often hold with these wild places. I was also really influenced by the people that I met on the trip, the other participants on the ship. There were a lot of youth activists, business leaders, expedition leaders, NGOs, and an amazing woman called Danny Keeler, who was the first First Nations woman from Canada to ever visit Antarctica. And it was those conversations that also really influenced my thinking around this film. So I won't say too much more. I'll let you watch the film, and I hope that you enjoy it. But maybe my final message would be, it's never been more important to protect the last great wildernesses on Earth. They are crucial for the future of all of our lives on this planet. And Antarctica is probably the last great one that we have. So I invite you, after watching this film, to think carefully about your own relationship to nature and how we can stand up for these last wild places. I hope you enjoyed the film. Antarctica. A vast landscape of ice and mountains. White as far as the eye can see. Uninhabitable to humans. Yet impacted by every action we take. Today, the continent stands at a crossroads.
We're talking about changes that are being driven, warming the atmosphere.
Water temperatures are a few degrees above normal. The glacier itself is starting to develop a lot of cracks and fractures.
What if we really stopped to listen? I've often dreamt of Antarctica. They say it's the last great wilderness on Earth. To me, it evokes images of polar explorers, stories of the most intrepid kind. Given the chance to join an expedition myself, I wanted to retrace their footsteps, to look deeper into the history of this elusive continent. To get there, you have to cross one of the most dangerous oceans on Earth, the Drake Passage. Imagine waves of up to 30 feet tall, and nothing but giant petrels and albatross to guide the way. It's strange to think so few humans have ventured to this part of the world. Those who have come are driven by a deep sense of adventure, curiosity, and scientific inquiry.
Why did we explore? Why did we go to the bottom of the world?
This is Antarctica. The history and secrets of Earth are hidden under the ice.
But behind the tales of adventure, buried deep within the ice, lie dark stories of our past. She has watched as we have tried to conquer her, claim her, and colonize her.
Fly again over Little America.
Even tried to control her.
During an era of unlimited power, when science may be able to alter the temperature balance and convert the cold regions to hospitable, productive ones.
Her resources were pillaged, and wildlife driven to the brink of extinction.
The chase is on. He fires. The whale's pace is slowing. The distance is narrowing. The second harpoon is fired. Brief struggle as the whale fights for his life. In these conditions, whales will be harder to find, even harder to shoot.
Pieces of destruction left in our wake. It's on this icy continent that our relationship to nature is revealed. We are guests on a wild planet. Today, the continent faces a new threat. She is changing, cracking, crying out and breaking into pieces. What was once ice is becoming water. The maps are being redrawn and the geography of our planet is being rewritten.
A warming atmosphere is creating serious problems.
Welcome to the Thwaites Glacier.
Scientists are warning of dramatic changes at one of the biggest glaciers in Antarctica.
It poses an international security threat.
The size of Great Britain.
A dramatic sea level rise.
As human activity warms the planet, and as pieces fall away, we must ask, what is our relationship to this magnificent land? She is not a resource to conquer and pillage, but a fundamental part of our very being. Whilst Antarctica may feel far away, we are in a constant dialogue, a symbiosis. Our actions are transforming this delicate ecosystem, and in return, she threatens to transform all of our lives. To protect ourselves, we must protect our source. We must reimagine our relationship to the natural world, to treat her the way we wish to be treated ourselves. We are Antarctica, and she is us.
Hello. Thank you. I'd like to invite our panel up to the stage. We're going to talk for about half an hour, and then we're going to try and bring you guys into the conversation. Do you want to come up? See. Thanks for that. So at the heart of what we want to talk about tonight is just this idea of relationships with the furthest flung parts of the world, relationships with nature and with each other, and how we bridge that gap between us. Tonight we have Shivi Dwivedi, a good friend of Reboot's, an associate, and Ayisha Siddiqa, who from Pakistan, who I heard this afternoon talking in the New York Times about monsoons, and as a land rights defender, currently studying at New York State University. Is that right? Well, what I thought I might do is actually ask you both at this stage just to introduce a little bit yourselves with the question, what is it in your heart that makes you do what you do? Ayisha first.
Me first. So I joined this movement. In this movement, I mean advocacy on behalf of the climate at the age of 17, 18. And around that time, I thought my job was to save the world. I thought that's what I had to do. And it was so heavy. And also, like, I was 17. I'm 23 now. But the question is, what is at the heart of the work I do? And for me, it took understanding that my world is incredibly small. My world is my community in northern Pakistan. It's at the merging of two rivers, and it is my family, and it is that land. And the reason that is my world is because if any part of it is destroyed, if I lose any part of it, the whole world ends for me. And that is at the heart of the work I am doing, because the loss and what it is at stake is so incredibly immense, that I'm watching worlds end every day in front of my eyes, and it's not seeming to resonate with people who have not felt that yet.
Thank you. Shivi, what's the heart of the motivation of the work you do?
So I grew up and still live in India, and which even today has 64% of its population living in the rural areas. So you grew up and seeing a lot of social issues, and it makes you question. And you realize they're all interconnected, so you don't know where to start. And I was always very passionate about, wildlife, animal rights, human rights, and I said, how can I talk about climate change when there are people talking about lack of access to water, or lack of access to electricity, or food, or education? So for the longest time, I just felt like, keep your blinkers on and just, study and get into the roles and live the regular life. And at some point I said, this is not making sense. So I didn't start at 17. Started much later. I'm quite honest that I found my agency much, much later. But it was just that there's no turning back. It's all interrelated. Find and do even the small things that can make a change in your own capacity. And that, like I said, it just took me a little longer to really be able to grasp and hold that. And so I keep that moment where I realize that every step or every word or every action matters, which is my guiding, my North Star now.
Thanks. So you were one of the passengers or explorers, should we say, on the same expedition which Jack went on to Antarctica. How did that experience change you? And what kind of empathy did it help you build? And did it change your impression of what Antarctica was?
So like I said, I grew up in India, and Antarctica was so far. You see it, you learn that it's on the map, it's on the world map, but I thought there's no way that I would ever get to see it. And I thought, you've got to be a scientist. You've got to have this big purpose, or really a job to get there. And so I was always curious about really experiencing a place which does not have the population like country that I come from, and what does a place that does not have that kind of population look like? What is the impact, or how pure it is? And that was something that was always staying with me, to experience a place or experience nature in a format which is unadulterated, it's pure, does not have the kind of human impact which I've grown up around, or I've grown up in the middle of. And it was in 2012 that I knew somebody who said, I'm going on an expedition to Antarctica, and it's all about building future leaders and really making it accessible to people to understand and change perspectives. And at that time, I didn't know what I would do with that experience. So it's taken me 10 years since to really find it in me to make this journey. And it has changed me deeply. For me, it was I was taking it for my own personal journey, my own quest as somebody who's been fighting from an advocacy perspective around climate change, fighting for what roots do young people have in terms of spaces where decisions are being taken about their future, my future generations, my generation. So it's really, it's given me a fresh perspective, and in moments where you feel so exhausted with pessimism, or things are not going fast, I try to go back to that moment when I was in Antarctica, and a lot of what Jack said resonates with all of us who were there, who experienced it together. There's this power, there's this beauty which is so pure, and it's so strong, and that's the feeling that I go back to when I'm feeling overwhelmed. So using that visual, that landscape, that surrounding as a place to just ground yourself and remember the fight that you're fighting for. So it's the perseverance, it's the strength, it's the resilience that Antarctica shows. How do you embody that? So it's a little bit of empathy, and how do you embody what a landscape is giving you?
So Ayisha, I want to kind of expand on that and talk about the sense of empathy. So part of the premise of the work we did in Antarctica was, how do you display empathy with Antarctica, which for most of us I think will remain a kind of abstraction. It doesn't exist on a material basis, and we don't necessarily have to or see or engage in something like Antarctic culture. So we don't know how to engage and empathize or build a relationship with it. And I thought maybe an interesting question, because this is the heart, how do we empathize with people in another part of the world? And I guess my question to you is, what impacts do people on the other side of the world have on your community? But equally, what can you do in your community to impact people on the other side of the world?
Before I answer that question, I'd love to respond to some of the things that Shivi has said, because although Pakistan and India are different countries, we share one big landmass. And Pakistan is actually home to 7,236 glaciers. This is the second most after the Arctic. The relationship that communities like mine and pastoral communities and those who live around the northern Himalayas have to the glaciers, to the fresh water, to what would be described as this cold terrain, is actually beyond, I guess, like a kind of untouchable purity, because we believe that we are nature, and it is not separate from us. And because of that cosmology, defending the glaciers and protecting the water is a responsibility that you learn at a very early age. So my grandfather was a water protector, and the way that he was a water protector is we have multiple rivers running down the terrain of Pakistan, but the biggest one is called the Chenab River, and it runs from the Himalayas all the way down to Sindh. Then you have the Jhelum River, which comes from the east side into Pakistan. So it comes from India into Pakistan, and my community is at the center. Because we are at the center of the community, water protection meant that when the Jhelum got too big, my grandfather would carve streams, and he would ensure that our community was not flooded. When the Jhelum was drying up, he would close the streams and make sure that the water was given the right of passage. We also rely a great deal on the fresh water that comes from the glaciers. But this responsibility was his father's responsibility, and he wasn't paid for this. This is our commitment to the land where we live. And so in regards to empathy, what does an area like the Antarctic or the glaciers provide? Just immediately, for us, that area cools. It provides a shield and it allows the cooling and keeping the temperatures of Pakistan alive. And actually, the Himalayas are extremely crucial to South Asia. They are melting at a faster speed than ever before. My country was flooded this year, but in order to understand the flooding, we have to go back to spring. We have to go back to March of 2020. Heat reached 122 degrees Fahrenheit in March. This heat was unlike we've seen in the past 60 years. It caused the glaciers to melt at an incredible speed. The melting glaciers caused 30 rivers that surround them to flood. Those 30, not 30 rivers, 30 lakes. Those lakes then caused the rivers to flood. When the rivers flooded, they took communities with them. So we're the relationship that the Antarctic or the glaciers on the far north and the far south have to the glaciers in the middle of the Earth by the equator are actually very much interconnected. And the other thing is, I have been incredibly blessed to be raised with tribal and like cosmology that I was raised with. And which is along the lines of, from a very young age, I was taught that the Earth is a living being, that every aspect of it is a living, and it has a consciousness. And so the river is my relative, the glaciers are my relative, the mountains are my relative, and if I speak about defending nature, I am nature defending itself. And that cosmology really shaped the kind of emotional empathy that we can have to the, I suppose, non-human world. Because what my community can teach, I suppose, people not from there, is that you are not separate from the glaciers of the Antarctic. You are not separate from the polar bears. You are not separate from the sea lions. You are not separate from it melting. And you're not separate from its destruction either. Because the way that nature is destroyed in communities like mine, that's when it is in pain, we are in pain as well. When it is taken from, we experience extraction as well. And our livelihoods are so interdependent on it. And what nature teaches me at the same time, like the glaciers in the Himalayas, or I have not been to the Arctic or the Antarctic, is that there is a lesson to be learned in its quiet resilience. But at the same time, because it is a conscious being, it actually does have a voice. You just have to listen to it. And if you listen to it, it will provide you and it will guide you in how to take care of it.
Thank you. That's amazing. Yeah. What I very much liked about that was the idea of empathy. When you talked about your grandfather and your ancestors, that the idea of empathy extends to those who lived before us, and by extension, empathy extending to those people who are not yet born yet, who will come after us as well. And also the idea of empathy in the what we call the non-material world, or the spirit world, or the religious or numinous sense, however you choose to describe it. Because I think very often, or almost always, these questions of empathy and consciousness come back to a question which is about a spiritual life. Shivi, do you want to? I have another question here. I feel it's slightly immaterial after that, but do you want to respond to any of that? Of what Ayisha's just said?
It's like she said, we're separate. We're separated by a border, but the Himalayas, we share that sort of source of water, as to say. And it's beautiful that it makes me a bit jealous that I don't have that kind of a relationship with nature growing up. Grew up in a city, fast-paced, and everything that comes with it. But Antarctica gave me, I feel, a bit of what Ayisha is just talking about. What runs in our blood is something that I'm discovering for myself, which is what I'm on a journey of. That I want to create change, but I also want to see the beauty and be reassured that things are worth protecting, that it's all not doomsday. There are parts of it which are still untouched, and there's a way that we can preserve it. It's not all gone yet.
How does that manifest now you've come back? So you went to the Antarctic in spring of this year, now you're back. How does that sense of empathy manifest itself in action? How do you give the Antarctic a voice?
I mean, it's just made me more passionate and given me a drive much more than what I felt I had before. So like I said, it's a constant reminder that what you're doing matters. Just do it with a lot more passion. Create more impact in the spaces that you can. Make connections, build bridges, collaborate, radically collaborate, not just, talking to the same people, but how do you bring different people together? How do you bring different voices to the same table? What are the different solutions? So whether it's in your ancestral knowledge, whether it's from the indigenous, whether it's from tech, whether it's the metaverse, what are the different things that are going on out there? And in the work that I do, it's a perfect match, and maybe that is why it's more that I have this role for a limited time. What can I do to make the most out of this opportunity that I have with me?
I like very much the idea of, in terms of the empathy between the glaciers of the Himalayas and the Antarctica. I don't know why I'd never thought of that before. It seems kind of intuitive when you mention it. But also the Antarctic is a desert as well, and this was part of our desire, was to bring the desert of Antarctica to Egypt and see what resonances and what empathy we could be building here. I wanted to come back to this question of values, because I think, as I say, I think the climate crisis is a crisis of values, and what values will sustain us and take us forward. And Ayisha, I wanted to just ask you, what values do you think that we need to hold in ourselves and with others to get us through this thing?
Before coming to Egypt, I was at a retreat in upstate New York, and it was a retreat for the indigenous people of the Americas, but also an effort to bring tribal communities, indigenous peoples from the world together. Most people don't know this, but Central Asia is home to the most amount of indigenous tribes in the world and indigenous peoples. And during my time there was this phenomenal speaker. Her name is Sherry. And Sherry said something to me that I will not forget. Because the earth is a conscious being, it is not odd that she is giving birth to her guardians at this stage in the forms that they are possessing in all parts of the world. And how I will get to the point of values, but the children being born at this very stage all over the world, in terms of energy, in terms of being part of nature, we can feel Earth's pain. Perhaps to a larger extent than the generations that came before us. Because just like animals who are born, and I'm going to refer to Darwinism here, the Galapagos finches, they adapted to their environment so that they could survive. But the environment also had a symbiotic relationship with them, so that when they went otherwhere, it was more difficult. Humans are like that too. We have a symbiotic relationship with Mother Earth. And in all of the different parts, from the desert to the glaciers to the forests, she is crying out. And perhaps it's not the values of doing better. Perhaps we need to listen and we need to feel that pain. There is a reason why climate anxiety is so prevalent among the youth. We can feel it. There is a reason why indigenous peoples all over the world are talking about defense of land, so that in a larger defense of everybody else. And in spaces like this, like the conference of parties where everybody is dressed in suits and running from one conference to another, we don't take a moment to look and hear what is occurring around us. There is so much tension at that conference. There's a reason why there's so much tension at that conference. There's an atmosphere, I suppose. It's because while there are agents of hope and change, there are also agents who are causing the destruction of our planet, concentrated in one conference. And it is places outside that we get to feel connection to each other, but we really got to pay attention to that. It's not a coincidence that you leave feeling like crap after the conference. That is another way that the earth is telling you, you got to do something else.
Thank you. Shivi, I want to ask you the same question, perhaps phrased differently. I think we live in an age where a lot of people feel a lack of agency and don't know quite how they themselves as a separate entity within the world can make a change. And you're somebody at a very high level has been seen to make a change. How do you find your special gift personally, that you find your unique contribution to the world, and how can other people do the same?
So it's linked to values, because that is what drives you or grounds you or tells you what you're doing is right or wrong. And for me, it's love and empathy. So I feel at extreme levels. It's extreme happiness, extreme sadness, or and that's what drives me. I think just gives me. So it's love, or it's feeling so strongly or passionately about something which really drives me. And it could be, like I said, it could be a good feeling, like it could be a really, really sad feeling. And the other is empathy, but in a way which comes from fairness and linked to integrity in a way as well. So in the work that I do, which is all about creating pathways for young people to come into these climate conversations, in these conferences or the regional climate weeks, but in these global conversations, it is about being very mindful of how do you bring voices that have been marginalized for years, for decades, for centuries. How do you bring them into a space and give them a platform which makes them feel like an equal, and not just, you're put in a central place saying, I've placed this youth here and my job is done. How do you give them the space to feel like their opinion matters and what they say is really going to bring about change? How do you go beyond that just tokenism of, just for a tick mark in terms of diversity or inclusion? So how do you go just beyond those? And I feel very strongly about that. So it gives me good days and bad days. But yeah, that's what drives me in my work.
Thank you. I've got a question. You've both been super open with us tonight, and I've got a question which is really about kind of cracking something open. And I might ask you, Ayisha, what is it when you think about nature and the natural world? What is it that breaks your heart?
Although I operate in spaces of policy and oftentimes advocacy, and I speak a language of numerics because I suppose that's what gets you taken seriously. A lot of this work comes from a very emotional perspective as well. And it's both my well of hope, but earlier I was talking to you about how young people can feel the climate crisis beyond just, the visible, that there is something hurting us and we're in pain. I just lost my train of thought. What breaks my heart is that others don't feel it. It's so odd to me that others don't feel it. And a community like mine in Pakistan that has experienced so much flooding and that has now turned into a humanitarian crisis, a health crisis, it feels sometimes that our blood is not as red as the people in the global south. That watching, like, we're sitting in Egypt right now, and I know it is nighttime, but it's been so hot. People live here, and they experience summer here, and they have children here. And why do we have a higher threshold for suffering for the people of the global south, while simultaneously also expecting us to be so resilient that we offer the solutions? That is heartbreaking. And also at the same time, the climate crisis, especially from the region that I come from, has manifested not just in heat waves or floods or droughts. There have been wars. The industry that is leading this crisis has dropped bombs in the area that I come from, completely ripped communities. Floods also happened in Afghanistan. Nobody heard about them. Nobody donated to them. Because the people in power we didn't want to support that. But vulnerability has manifested in so many different ways that in order to get access to these precious resources like oil, we've created unstable governments, unhospitable environments, and just ravaged and gone to war with nature for profit. And the fact that we cannot see that this is wrong after 27 years of conferences again and again, like, what will it take? How much loss will it take for the world leaders to wake up?
Thank you. Thank you for being so honest with us as well. I think that's probably the most important question we can ask ourselves and also of each other. And even when the people seem to be acting with huge degrees of callousness and a complete lack of empathy, and there's a lot of that about, the question is what's hurting them, what caused them to build a callous around their heart that they could act with such careless cruelty? Because for sure there's a lot of that about, but we have to extend empathy even to the worst of us, I think. I'm going to try and end on a constructive, upbeat, chirpy note. One of the areas of empathy that we can display is geopolitical empathy between people or between nation states, which perhaps don't display a lot of it. That's a political level. And I just wanted a question to you both about India and Pakistan. What are the, countries which can be often described as at odds with each other? What is the commonality in terms of the climate crisis that not each of you individually, but both India and Pakistan face?
I don't want to end off on a bad note, so
No, we won't.
just like the river is my relative, the people making decisions that are harming the earth are also my relatives. And my responsibility is not only to nature, it is my responsibility to also change that. And as far as India and Pakistan are concerned, we are one landmass. A border was drawn, and there's just been a great deal of insert whatever tension you want to. But the heat waves, in terms of their how they're hurting communities, how they're despairing communities, how much suffering they've caused, have been similar. The way that that has then led to more losses and damages have been similar, because when it is so hot, your trash begins to rot. That rotting trash attracts mosquitoes. Those mosquitoes bring malaria, dengue, cholera. So the way that the suffering is occurring is almost simultaneous. It is simultaneous. There's a great lesson to be learned in that. It doesn't matter if we call ourselves X country or Y country. Our thriving and our prosperity is tied to each other, but also our I don't like using the word destruction, but if that is what is going to happen, it is tied to each other.
I think it's about the climate movement between lots of different stakeholders, which we often see at spaces like COP as well. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of, the movement can be fragmented as well, and if you were able to keep all of that aside, I think a lot more could happen a lot more quickly. And when Ayisha and I met, we met in a space where we're talking about climate solutions or climate action, or what does it mean to bring global south. So we become one landmass. I don't think we've ever spoken about where we come from and how does this change the way that we feel or we talk about it. You just know, really. You just know where you come from. That's part of our roots, our culture, and we're related like that. So I don't think there's no political scenario here. It's more about how do we work together, and that is what matters in the end. Like it's not just one working on it; it's two. And so I think this movement, at least from a youth perspective, is able to really break those barriers. So if that's the movement now, I'm just really grateful for what the future holds with these people. And I know Ayisha, it just 2 days ago when we met, she was just like, we were at this. For the first time ever at a COP, there's a space which is solely dedicated to children and youth. We're in the middle of it, and it's buzzing and it's full. And Ayisha and I were standing next to each, and she said, "How does it feel to be surrounded by leaders of the future?" And I was like, "It just feels incredible, and it gives me goosebumps." I think that defines what you even ask about a geopolitical scenario. There's nothing that can break what brings us together.
Well, that sounds like the very best note to end on, and I hope that the people in the blue zones and the green zones and elsewhere are listening tonight, because this is exactly the kind of conversation that will lift hearts and take us forward.